everyone to the second day of the OSCE Academy in Bishkek organized conference on COVID-19 crisis and its impact on post-Soviet Central Asia. So today we have a very interesting and topical panel on COVID-19 and migration. And we are very lucky to have a stellar group of participants and also a very renowned keynote speaker and discussant on this issue. So before commencing the panel, I would just like to briefly introduce the speaker, the discussant, and the panelists, and also discuss the details of our proceedings today, particularly the timing. So we have one keynote presentation today by Dr. Damir Esenaliev, who is a senior researcher in Leibniz-Institut of Vegetable and Ornamental Crops and the International Security and Development Center. And we also have three panelists who will be presenting their views on several topical issues on COVID-19. We have Nina Miholchik, who is an integration officer at the Belgrade Center for Human Rights in Serbia. And we have Permet Akilbek Kezi, who is an independent researcher in Kyrgyzstan. And we also have a panel presentation by Sherod Shamiev from Safer World in Tajikistan, and Dariush Soliev, who's an independent researcher in Tajikistan. And the way the panel is set up is that we provide Dr. Esenaliev with 20 minutes to present his paper and 10 minutes to answer questions. This is followed by 15 minutes for each of the panelists. We will have a 5-minute break after first two panelists present their papers. And then we will have the discussants to provide inputs for 15 minutes, so approximately 5 minutes on each of the papers. And then we will move on to open discussion. And I just want to mention that the participants are free to ask any questions through the chat function, and also to raise their hands if they want to ask the question live. And also, I just realized I forgot to introduce the discussant, so sorry about that. The discussant today is Muslim Beg Buriev, who is a contributing author and editor for the Institute of War and Peace Reporting in Tajikistan. So without further ado, I would request Dr. Damir Esenaliev to present his paper on the social impact of COVID-19 worldwide and in Kyrgyzstan, findings from the Life with Corona study. So over to you, Dr. Damir Esenaliev.
Thank you, Mirza, and good afternoon to everyone. Let me start with sharing my screen. I'd like to start with thanking the organizers for the opportunity to speak at this conference. I'm not too foreign to the academy. I taught a very short course with Philip Schroeder on mixed methods for the economists in your program. But largely to shortly present that I work in Germany, now presenting you from Berlin. IGZ and ISDC are two research institutes where I work as economist conducting research. Most of my work relates to Kyrgyzstan, where I am from originally, but I've been outside of country for a while. So my topic today is about social impact of COVID worldwide and in Kyrgyzstan, using the data from an online study called Life with Corona. And definitely such work cannot be done by one person. It's a product of many people, my colleagues, which I'm going to introduce their affiliations soon. So Tilman Brook is the one who leads as a co-investigator of this study. Now, just a moment. Okay, so what is Life with Corona? It's a global research project to collect real-time data on the social and economic impact of COVID-19. It started end of March this year to largely at the peak of all the lockdown and other measures in Europe that started. And it started largely as a German project, and that's why we will see that we have most data coming from Germany. And it was started by a number of research institutes and universities in Europe, ISDC, IGZ, both of my employers in that consortium, but also UN wider in Helsinki, University of Constance, and Institute of Development Studies. I should mention that OSCE Academy is a partner in this project, being a network partner, helping to distribute information as well as to collect data. So in that respect, I should say another thanks to those who contributed to this study by helping to translate into languages, local languages in Central Asia, in wider Central Asia. So when we started this survey, we asked for help, and alumni of OSCE Academy was very active, suggesting help and really making sure that local languages in Central Asia are present. So for example, we had Uzbek, Kazakh, and Kyrgyz languages present in the first round of the survey, the data I'm going to present soon. Now, these are languages we have. It's for the second round of the survey. We definitely over time things change. So some questions were very acute at the beginning, less acute now. Some issues are more acute now than used to be. So for example, in the early days of the coronavirus, the panic food buying was probably one thing most of us experienced, while it's not really an issue, seems to be now. But things like food security and violence is more acute in these days than it used to be. So just to say that we had one wave of the data collection for 6 months, from March to October. Now, since October, we have a second round, which is a bit different in terms of questions, but also trying to ask questions are most relevant. Now, moving to the sample itself. So largely our findings based on 12,000 responses worldwide. And as I said, because it started in Germany, almost half of the responses coming from Germany. Definitely we have other countries like US, Argentina, Great Britain, Portugal, that also provided a bulk of responses. And we also tried to get more data from one of the countries in the region, and given we're interested in Kyrgyzstan and we wanted to present some data for the conference called Life in Kyrgyzstan in October, we made an extra effort to collect data in Kyrgyzstan, and we can now compare and present to you some of the findings just to show that some things are the same everywhere, but a few things are different. So one definitely note to make here is that data are very unbalanced in terms of coverage by countries, but also across time. So for example, for German data, we got data around March and April and May, and less after. So in that respect, comparing across time is also an issue, but definitely given we have so many responses, not sharing would be something not good. Yeah. So what we try to do is to give weight in terms of gender and age groups. So this is the only way you can probably do comparison across countries. So as you see on the right side, you have distribution by age groups, which more or less distributed equally, with the older age group we call 45 plus, probably the highest proportion of people. So we collected data, and after 6 months, we thought it's time to present to the world what we see in the data with your help, with probably some of you providing also response to this survey. And we come up with 6 most interesting in our view. Definitely we can come up with probably 16 more, but these are either supporting strongly some beliefs and not supporting as well. So this report is also available in the website below. You can find it if you type lifewithcorona.org. Just to say that this report was quite widely cited by global media, newspapers like Spiegel, Guardian, Newsweek, The Economist did cite some of the findings, which you also will learn very soon. Now, what are the 6 findings? Definitely, as I said, there are more, but these are something we thought are interesting or unexpected. First, young adults are as well behave responsibly as others. Yeah, so in at least Europe, there is a notion, a belief that young people behave irresponsibly. They do parties and they spread the virus more than other age groups. It's not true. Secondly, and yesterday it was also discussed about domestic violence during COVID times. Stress on families during the pandemic falls disproportionately on women. This household size more than 2 people. Surprisingly, older people are less stressed than younger people and less worried about their circumstances. But definitely by older, we mean people who are 45 plus in terms of age, so not necessarily very old, not that in risk group. For each country, we counted a death peak, more or less trying to see effects before and after. So support for government measures drops after the peak is over. Number 5, probably this question is very relevant to nowadays because of vaccine seems to be proved it's effective. So the question was, in what extent you want a vaccine if it becomes available to your own country or worldwide or to a country which is affected most. So most people say it should be available worldwide and then next to their own country, with only USA being exception, with a higher proportion of people saying we want it to us first and then to others. And last finding was younger people are more willing to pay to stop the spread if they can than the older people. So now what I'm going to show is to show data for Kyrgyzstan compared to top 10 countries here. So we cannot use all the data because of the small size in terms of responses. But top 10 countries had at least about 150 and more responses, and they are weighted in terms of age and gender. Moving on, so I'm going to show a number of charts comparing Kyrgyz case with more or less top 10 other countries and saying what is different, what is not. So one is about undertaking counter coronavirus actions, more or less sanitary actions, wearing masks or washing hands or avoiding crowds. So this number can go from 0 to 9. And more or less everywhere in other parts of the world, it's about 6 measures people do it daily, while in Kyrgyzstan it seems to be from 3.5 to 5 something. So in that respect, feels like population in Kyrgyzstan behaves less responsibly. And what extent it's true, we cannot probably say. Definitely it reflects the time data was collected in Kyrgyzstan. It was around September, October, which means that the first wave of the virus was over which was the peak being around June and July. Now, a second finding is about tensions in households, and it's higher in Kyrgyzstan than other parts of the world. It's about 5 from 1 to 10, while worldwide it's about 4 in average. If to look at households across size of households, then doesn't seem to be too much different. People seems to be most stressful in households with about 3 people, but then it goes down. Now, moving to finding number 3, whether people are worried about their health. Indeed, given the situation with healthcare system in the country, people are more worried in Kyrgyzstan compared to other countries, and it grows with age as well. And surprisingly, again, as it was worldwide finding that older people are stressed less, slightly less than younger people. So in that respect, it's one of the interesting findings we show here. Moving on, finding number 4. So support for countermeasures in Kyrgyzstan is lower than in other countries. And again, it probably reflects the fact that data from Kyrgyzstan were collected after all the measures taken by government, things like restriction of movements and etc. It was probably reflects this fact that people are less now supportive to what government did or wants to do. Now moving to vaccines. So the question was, if a vaccine becomes available today, how would you distribute it? To yourself first, to your own country, or worldwide, or to the most affected country? So largely people are very generous. They say it should become available worldwide, then to my own country and to the most affected. And Kyrgyz respondents seems to be similar to what others think, with the exception of United States, as I already told you, with slightly higher proportion of respondents saying that vaccines should be available to the United States and to the rest of the country. Probably it also reflects how heavy the situation is in the United States. Moving on to the last finding, the question was how much of your annual income you would be ready to pay if you can stop the spread of the virus from 0 to 100%. And it seems to be younger people are more generous. They offer, for example, worldwide about 1/3 of their income to pay, compared with 20-something in the older group. But in Kyrgyzstan, in pink and red, you see that people are willing to pay much more than worldwide, which is interesting. So definitely it also probably reflects how heavy the situation was and how the healthcare system was not able to cope fully with the number of people who were infected. This slide largely concludes what we find in the study in terms of 6 interesting findings, but compared to Kyrgyzstan as well. So just to repeat what you already saw now. So people in Kyrgyzstan undertake significantly less counter-coronavirus actions, like washing hands and wearing masks in public. Tensions in households is higher than in other countries. People are more worried about their health. Support for countermeasures is lower, and majority of people want global access to vaccine as everywhere. And younger people in Kyrgyzstan are also willing to pay more to stop the virus. So in a way, this is what we find, this is what we thought is our obligation to present, given we collected data and took time from the respondents and to others who helped us. we cannot really say too much about what
Well, I can ask a question to you, Dr. Damir. Maybe I could encourage others to ask questions too. I noticed that you found some interesting results on the level of tension in households. And I was wondering if you did any kind of study on the impact of COVID-19 on violence escalation in societies. So, for example, back home in Australia, there has been many cases of attacks on members of Asian communities, and there has also been an exponential increase in domestic violence. So I was wondering if any of the data suggests any link between COVID-19 and societal violence.
Yeah, definitely that question which became apparent in a couple of months after the COVID started. Yeah, I mean, concerns about food security, availability of food, and etc. definitely led to both types of violence outside of your house as well as inside of your house. So we didn't think it was very important question at the beginning. Definitely you can think that it may happen, but it became indeed clear later, right? So the current survey, the second round of the survey, which is you can fill out now, asks about domestic violence a little bit and outside of the meaning public violence. Yeah, so that is one of the focus topics we are now asking to collecting data as of moment. So definitely what we have now is not enough to say something meaningful. We mostly looked at tensions, whatever was relevant at the beginning of the coronavirus. So for example, panic food buying was one of the topics, which gardening, for example, if people started thinking about growing own food, was another thought we had. So yeah, I think with the second round of the survey and with more and more data being collected worldwide through phone surveys, through online surveys, we'll be able to see the scale of the violence that is related to COVID. But as of now, definitely yesterday, there were a couple of presentations looking exactly at this issue, but definitely violence outside is another concern that is probably on rise, but difficult to judge the size of this violence.
Thank you very much, Dr. Damir. Yes, it's definitely the preliminary stages of research in COVID-19. So I guess as more data is collected, more analysis is done, we'll get more insights into the actual impact of this pandemic on society. And I think the research that you've done is definitely going to pave the way for much more research in this topic, and hopefully will encourage young researchers to look into these important issues. Are there any questions at all from the participants? Perhaps the panelists have some questions for Dr. Damir?
I think there is one question from Lena.
So I'll just read out the question. The participant has asked, can you please tell us in short what the German media reported about the survey? What was the agenda behind, and how was it presented?
I think I'm probably not the best person to respond to this particular question, given I speak some German, but not in a level yet to read newspapers and watch the news and the television. But definitely this German media, in the extent I was involved in the preparation of materials, was quite cautious. Yeah, I mean, there are many studies like this, and they want to have big samples to make valid conclusions. So at the beginning, when we tried to promote the study and findings, they were quite cautious, not really sometimes not taking the material we shared with them. But with the 6 months finding, it was largely reporting what I already reported to you. The vaccines distribution was something that brought attention to of many. The young people, how they behave. So largely in summertime, many young people had parties and people felt that they are behaving irresponsibly. So in that respect, the study was showing some debunking of some beliefs, and it was probably good to bring some data and say it's not necessarily true what you believe, what you see. I think German media is quite not to say that they are not trying to necessarily show kind of big news. So in that respect, our data, which we try to be quite strict in terms of how we explain it, I think they were quite modest in presenting what we find. Yeah. So we are researchers and we have we value what we do in terms of being honest, how much this data can bring and how much it can show. Definitely, it depends how people respond. So we cannot really say fully how much the truthful is the data, right? But definitely, given it's online survey, people are providing information anonymously. Yeah, so we are not asking names and etc. So in that respect, it should be quite truthful in terms of what we find. So Lina, I apologize, not really responding very specifically to your question. If it's very interesting, I can ask my colleagues who are German speakers, but this is what I can say at the moment.
Thank you very much, Dr. Damir. And thank you very much for your presentation. It was very insightful. Now we will move on to the panel presentations. The panel presentations are 15 minutes each, and we have 3 presentations today. The first presentation is by Ms. Neha Miholchik, and her topic is how to stay and earn at home, migration issues in Kyrgyzstan. So, I think this is an issue that we've all been contemplating in these days. So without further ado, over to you, Ms. Miholchik.
Well, good morning, everyone. Yes, it is 9:31 here in Belgrade. Also, I've changed a bit the headlines. So I thought at first this would be like misleading to earn at stay at home. So now it's very like popular English saying that means like to stay and earn at your own accommodation. So I've changed a bit headline. Instead of how to stay and earn at home, I changed it into how to stay and earn in Kyrgyzstan. So first of all, I would like to thank the OSCE Academy for inviting me to this interesting panel and for giving me the opportunity to present my findings on migration issues in Kyrgyzstan during these very challenging times of the global pandemic. So a little bit about myself. I'm Nina Miholčić. I come from Serbia, from Belgrade. I'm an international relations researcher interested in contemporary migration trends in Eurasia, but I'm also very much interested in the post-Soviet politics. And currently I work as an integration officer at the Belgrade Center for Human Rights. So let me share my presentation. Let's see here, how can I share? Well, basically I will share it to online. A second. Okay, I hope all of you can see my presentation. I share screen. Just a second, I apologize. And I also apologize in advance for the noise you might be hearing. So someone is hammering in my building. So there's also challenges of working at home. So can you see my presentation on the screen? Okay. So today I will talk about the current state of the Kyrgyz economy with a focus on rural Kyrgyzstan. Also, I will talk about the migration labor outflows and how to create economic incentives in order to reduce dependence on remittances in Kyrgyzstan. So if you're not familiar with the term remittances, basically throughout the whole presentation, I will use this widely accepted definition. So remittances are typically used to refer to money sent to family members back in a person's home country. So what is interesting about Kyrgyzstan is that it's one of the most remittance dependent countries in the world. Only 2019, it was the fourth most dependent nation globally, and almost 30 remittances accounted for almost 30% of the total GDP. Between 2010 and 2019, remittances were constantly comprising a fair share of the country's GDP. So the lowest was in 2015, but again, it was a pretty high number, 25%, and the highest was in 2018 with striking 33%. Again, the Russian market is still the prime source of remittances for Kyrgyz migrants. In 2019, the amount of money sent home by Kyrgyz migrants reached 2.4 billion of US dollars, but 98% of overall Kyrgyz remittances basically came solely from Russia. So again, why is Russia a popular destination for Kyrgyz migrants? And I would say not just for Kyrgyz migrants, but basically for all Central Asian migrants. Well, probably because of the fact that Central Asia shares with Russia common history, cultural links, and most importantly, language knowledge. And again, the Russian market is a huge market in constant demand for labor. Data from 2018 estimate that without these remittances, 31.5% of Kyrgyz population would dive into serious poverty. The situation is even more dramatic in the southern region, where in some places in the south, almost 60% of residents would be considered impoverished if not for these remittances. Even though remittances can really improve the well-being of receiving families or receiving households, they also at the same time create a culture of dependency. So this culture can really hinder the further economic development, and I believe this is one of the biggest issues of the contemporary Kyrgyz economy. Let's talk now about the impact of COVID-19 on Kyrgyz remittance flows. So the World Bank Group predicts that this year remittance flows to the low and middle income countries will fall by approximately 20%. But that is all because of the pandemic's impact on travel and world industry. The pandemic has already caused a sharp drop in wages, but also reduced employment of labor migrants in many host countries. And this has affected greatly Central Asia because this region really depends a lot on migration labor outflows and on remittances, particularly from Russia. So only in 2019, almost 15 billion in US dollars in personal remittances were sent from Russia to the member states of CIS. And we can see on the graph here that basically the three most receiving countries were basically Central Asian countries, Uzbekistan, Kyrgyzstan, and Tajikistan. Kyrgyzstan experienced a drop of 50 billion of US dollars, or around 9% in received personal remittances from Russia in the first quarter of this year compared to the same period last year. And also when we compare the two second quarters of 2019 and 2020, the drop is even more striking. There is a drop of 170 million US dollars and basically a decrease of 90% in received remittances from Russia. Since the beginning of the COVID-19 crisis, of course, many Kyrgyz migrants have lost their jobs in Russia. Some of them are trying to return home, but some of them have remained stuck basically at the Russian-Kazakh border. So how to create economic incentives in rural Kyrgyzstan? I argue that improved agrarian policy and also policies and investment in rural Kyrgyzstan can really decrease country's high immigration rates and also widespread poverty. Why do I think that rural Kyrgyzstan in particular needs reforming? Well, because Kyrgyzstan is a developing and predominantly agricultural country with almost 2/3 of population living in these rural areas. Why agrarian policies? Well, because the agricultural sector is one of the essential parts of country's economy, and this sector employs around 40% of the total labor force, but again accounts only for 20% of the total Kyrgyz GDP. Also, rural areas in Kyrgyzstan are affected by poor economic conditions, where basically the majority of population lives below the poverty line. So again, these poor economic conditions cause and create like a high rate of unemployment and also a lack of job opportunities that force many Kyrgyz people to work, to search for work abroad and somehow help their families through remittances. Here on the graph, you can see the agricultural land structure in Kyrgyzstan, and we can also see that pasture is the major land resource, accounting for 40% of the country's total territory and also covering almost 85% of the agricultural land structure. So this is very important land asset that again needs to be reformed. Smallholder farmers were basically the backbone of the Kyrgyz economy, depend a lot on livestock. Livestock again is a major source of food security in these rural communities. So, but the problem is actually that Kyrgyzstan suffers from low livestock and agricultural productivity. So for raising agricultural productivity, I believe that reforms and projects that can really help livestock development and modernize pasture management should be implemented and prioritized. Because, for instance, there are either missing or ruined infrastructure particularly in these rural areas, such as bridges, roads, water sources that really restrict the mobility of livestock, and that basically leaves many remote pastures almost unused. So projects that help development of agricultural infrastructure should be really prioritized and welcome. Also, improvement of livestock support services, such as the establishment of an effective private veterinary system, and also maybe reforming state services in this regard, but also exchange of ideas and expertise between experts and farmers regarding livestock farming and health could really improve agricultural productivity in rural Kyrgyzstan, also could create better economic incentives and subsequently reduce the migration rates. What is interesting about Kyrgyzstan is that it sends a higher number of women to work abroad compared to other two most sending countries of Central Asia, Uzbekistan and Tajikistan. Also, this feminization of Kyrgyz migration has started to increase from 2011, but this feminization actually has brought some very, I would say, challenging and disturbing trends, such as intimidating Kyrgyz women migrants, intimidating them through social media. There is also, there was like a group, so-called patriots, that members of this group are Kyrgyz male migrants that actually threaten and harass women migrants from Kyrgyzstan. Also, many women returnees, they face a lot of stigma, and they are more discriminated, especially young unmarried women, who are perceived somehow as immoral or less attractive, or someone who does not fit in traditional Kyrgyz system of accepted values and norms. But even though these women migrants, that they really also contribute to the household incomes of sending families, they are also more discriminated and have harder times upon returning to the country of origin. So when it comes to gender equality strategy, empowerment of women-headed households could really reduce this through social, again, through special funding, could really reduce gender inequality, and also help and support for women returnees would additionally reduce this gender gap. So to conclude, even though remittances, they really help sending families and developing countries to sustain, to maintain sustainable level of living, they also create very vulnerable economies, where any major crisis like the current one can really take a heavy toll on migrants and sending families as well. But I also argue that the current crisis should be perceived as a window of opportunity, especially for the Kyrgyz authorities, that could really start implementing reforms, especially agrarian reforms and better agrarian policies, in order to create better economic incentives. And that is how basically the authorities could reduce migration labor outflows, decrease immigration rate, and basically heal the local economy. So thank you very much for your attention. This will be the end of my presentation. Again, if you have any questions, you're free to ask them. I hope you enjoyed this presentation. So basically, I don't know how to turn off my presentations. Okay.
Thank you very much, Ms. Michalczyk. That was a very interesting presentation on migration and remittance issues in Kyrgyzstan. As I mentioned before, the questions will all be answered at the end of the 3 panel presentations. So now we will move on to the second panel presentation. And our next presenter is Ms. Burbed Akilbev Kezi. And her presentation is on labor migration in the shadow of the COVID-19 pandemic in Kyrgyzstan. So over to you, Ms. Kezi.
Okay. Can everybody see my presentation?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. First of all, I would like to thank OECD Academy for giving me the chance to share with my research interest, which is about labor migration in the shadow of COVID-19 pandemic in Kyrgyzstan. And I'd like to remind that it's just the beginning of my research, and I will have more time to research and find findings later. So today I'm going to talk basically about introduction, the research question, hypothesis, and methodology part of my research paper. As we all know, for Kyrgyz labor migrants, Russia is the main destination for migration. And according to official data from the Ministry of Internal Affairs of Russia, in 2019, more than 1,055,000 Kyrgyz citizens were officially registered in Russia, but around 20,000 of them are students and tourists from Kyrgyz Republic. But over the million, almost million citizens are labor migrants in Russia. Accordingly, those labor migrants are the ones who felt the negative consequences of COVID-19 and pandemic quarantine restrictions. If only before the COVID-19 and pandemic quarantine restrictions, the labor migrants were facing challenges in Russia, such as xenophobia or discrimination in Russian labor migrant in Russian job market. The COVID-19 has negatively influenced to the Kyrgyz labor migrants because majority of them lost jobs as they were working in shops, hotels, constructions, and other service sectors. And also the quarantine lockdowns and border closures and job closures worsened the economic situation of labor migrants who were working in Russia. So these all challenges led to a massive flow of Kyrgyz migrants returning back to Kyrgyzstan. So COVID-19 and pandemic brought majority of migrants back to home. And as Ms. Nina already mentioned, Russia is the main country for migrants to earn money, and remittance, where migrants sent remittances to Kyrgyzstan. And there was a sharp drop in the volume of transfers and remittances, which led to economic collapse in Kyrgyzstan. And migrants who have returned back to Kyrgyzstan, of course, they face challenges such as unemployment and economic instability, etc. In my research, I'm going to find about the challenges of COVID-19 for Kyrgyz labor migrants and how do the lives of migrants change during the pandemic. So my hypothesis is how Kyrgyz labor migrants are facing economic instability and uncertainty back in their homeland due to negative consequences of pandemic. And in my methodology part, I already started reading secondary materials and journals that are already done by different researchers and journalists. And I will also use semi-structured interview in order to collect information of personal stories of Kyrgyz labor migrants who have returned from Russia back to Kyrgyzstan. And basically, I am trying to find how they're coping with challenges of pandemic and quarantine restrictions back in Kyrgyzstan, and how it is going to influence to the political and economic stability of Kyrgyzstan. So that's shortly about the draft of my research paper, and that's it. I hope it was clear, and looking for suggestions and or questions or comments.
Thank you very much, Ms. Burbet. Certainly looks like a very interesting research topic, and we are very eager to see how it develops in the future. So we will continue with our proceedings for the day. The third panel presentation is by Sherzod Shamiev and Damir Esenaliev, and their presentation is on labor migration in the shadow of the COVID-19 pandemic, case study of Tajikistan. So over to Mr. Sherzod and Mr. Dariush.
Thank you, Mirza, for introducing us. It's a It's my great pleasure to be here at this conference, and I'd like to thank OC Academy and Danish Institute for International Studies for hosting this event and for giving us this opportunity to discuss these very important issues. Let me start with introducing the case of Tajikistan. As we know, COVID-19 has brought unprecedented challenges to the whole world community, and labor migration was especially hit the hardest. As it says through different sources, there are over 1 million labor migrants in Tajik labor migrants, primarily in Russia. It hit them very hard because they've lost their jobs. They're living in very crowded spaces, which increases the risk of their infection, and also they couldn't return back to their home countries. So this is how the research question that we have studied: how has COVID-19 affected the Tajik labor migration industry since the lockdown in Russia? And as we know, the Russia is a very important source of income and for Tajik economy, because Tajik labor migrants make out about 30% of the country's GDP. That's only in 2019, and the level was even to 50% of the GDP back in 2013. So that's why it's a profound issue for Tajikistan, and the pandemic has drastically worsened the condition of labor migrants. Let's go over the content. So we've divided the policy, our brief, into 3 parts. The first part, we have decided to focus on 3 main issues. Let's say it's indicators. Of course, there are many other indicators stemming from this crisis, but we have focused on 3 indicators that we consider the key to make an assessment of the situation of the labor migrants. So these are the restrictive measures. These are the restrictive policies that have affected the migrants. The volume of remittances, how they've changed, their change through Q1 and Q2, and compared to other years, and the migration flow, also compared to 2019. And the second part of the paper, it's assesses the repercussions of the pandemic on migration trends, and as well as on socio-economic effects, which will be mostly on Tajikistan and the families of the migrants. Next, we make an assessment of actions and policy options. Of course, we're at the preliminary stage of our research. That's why we haven't yet fully conducted the expert interviews. We are hoping to finish them by beginning of December. So this is the structure of the paper, and all these 3 indicators are assessed through causal process tracing methods, which tracks the dynamic of all these indicators throughout the pandemic and also the methodology of our research is mostly, it's a mixed qualitative research. We use mixed qualitative research methods, primarily a desk research. This presentation is based on the desk research, and then we also provide the key informant interviews later on. And I'd like to introduce my friend Dariush to make the overview of these 3 indicators that we have focused on.
Can you hear me? Can you hear me? Excuse me. Yes. So thank you very much, Rzot. I will move directly to these indicators. So first of all, it is the travel ban, as we know. So I will a bit move to the Russia directly, and there's some kind of their policy that have been applied during 2020. First of all, there was like restriction measures on a travel ban. It was introduced on March of 2020 till the May of 2020 in the first the period, and then it was prolonged till the end of the year. So during this travel ban, Russia banned all air flights, including like the border as well. So here the Tajik migrant just stuck in Russia and in Tajikistan, who were not able to go to Russia for the seasonal migration. Then this travel ban was prolonged till August, even if Russia just allowed the travel flight to some countries. Unfortunately, Tajikistan was not among those countries. So this is the first problem, the most important protective measure against COVID-19 applied by Russia. The second one is the self-isolation regime or quarantine regime, but in Russia they call it self-isolation regime. It also was introduced in the beginning of April approximately, where so all main they moved totally to the self-isolation regimes, and here we see that the Tajik migrants are not that social protected group even among the migrants, because Tajikistan is not a member of Eurasian Economic Union, and they are have to pass through different bureaucratic procedures, such as getting licenses, as you can see, or we call them patents. So this is another problem, because as you are following the self-isolation regime, which was prolonged till the June, then these migrants left without job during the second quarter of 2020. This is the problem. So, and a final measure applied by Russia was on licenses, but in this case it is much more positive, because Russia, according to the presidential decree like signed on April, all migrants don't need to pay this license fee, which is approximately 5,100 rubles. It is $66 per month. So, but it was introduced backdating. They signed it at April 18, but it started from March 15. So here we can see this gap where migrants lost some amount of their savings and unfortunately became like the victims of the situation. Can you move, Sherzad? So here you can see like the self-isolation index. It is interesting how like corporations can track us. It is self-isolation index made by Yandex.ru. It demonstrates in the integrated indicator calculated on the basis of data various Yandex applications and services by Yandex.ru, which is most famous like a most usable application and services all around Russia. Here you can see at the beginning in the March, the index is very low, 0.5 till 1, which means like there are a lot of people on the streets. And during the beginning of the pandemic, and this first wave, let's say, we can see there's almost no one on the streets, or some people. So it has some consequences on the migrants as well as on people, which will be demonstrated on the next slides. So can you move, Sherzad, please? So here you can see one back, yeah, thank you. So as the result of different measures mentioned before, we can see the remittance flow made by individuals during this first and second quarter of 2020 in comparison with 2019. Unfortunately, so far it is the last data from Central Bank of Russia. Of course, we will get the third and hopefully fourth part if we'll have time. So you can see that During the first quarter, the amount of remittance declined by 22%, and on the second quarter, it decreased by 50%. And if you compare, if we go and conclude with the information that I told you before, it is rational, and probably we will have some not good news on the third and the fourth, because currently Russia, Prime Minister of Russia, applying new quotas for Russia where they can have where they can work. For instance, they can work in a construction industries, approximately 80% of Russian migrants, and different quotas for different categories of work. The next, please, share. So, and that later we look and analyze the data and projections made by World Bank and different institutions. Share next. Here you can see that they project that GDP, so the remittance inflow will decrease to 1.9 billion US dollars. In comparison with last year, it was 2.5, but we doubt this projection because Tajikistan already lost $400 million, and within 2 quarters of this year it will be worse, we suppose. And another projection on the second figure, you can see that Tajikistan still this year becomes the first leading country of top recipients by share of GDP. The next, please. And finally, so as the for preliminary results and information from the Tajik sources, the migration flow decreased by 75% comparing with the last year, and again we see in the first half of 2020 the decrease of people by 90,000, and still we have there is decrease because the price of the tickets is very high because Tajikistan and Russia negotiated to launch charter flights. At first it was double priced, and you needed to approach to the embassy of your country. It was approximately $300 USD, but it was only for certain group of people, not for everyone. It was for sick people, for women, for pregnant people, for people with children, and we still have this limitation. The people from Tajikistan are not able to go back to visit Russia, but vice versa, it's possible. But currently, the prices are fixed a bit, approximately 400 euros, because Russian air companies also took the flights to Tajikistan and vice versa. So, and still this is very high, more than double price as it was before the pandemic, which will definitely impact the migration. Sherzad?
Thank you, Dariush. And I'd like to proceed with the next part. And all these, the 3 indicators that we've mentioned, the restrictive policies, the reduced volume of remittances, and the migration flow, they had a very extensive impact not only on the labor migrants, but also on the home country and their own households. Every year, many families from Tajikistan send their children or family members to Russia. Now, the migration flow, as you have seen, it has been dwindled to 57%. So this is a huge blow to the economy of Tajikistan, and it will be shown. It will be probably felt in the budget and in the budget of the country. And further, if we talk about the migrants, as we have already talked, the situation was further aggravated by the fact that migrants were living in a very crowded spaces when they have lost their jobs, and the jobs were and the restrictive measures were in place. So this has increased their risk of infection. And now we can go over the two, the short-term consequences and the long-term consequences of these of our assessment. So what we think is the short-term consequences will be the initial effect will be which has already been illustrated: the job loss and the outflow of migrants from Russia back to Tajikistan, and this is backed by the data that for instance the mayor of Moscow announced that the labor migrants in Moscow has decreased by 40% since the beginning of the 2020. And there's a large number of unfilled vacancies available now in Russia. And if we think about the labor, the migration flow, the Russian Ministry of Internal Affairs has published the data that illustrates the number of migrants who registered with them it was 14.9 million last year, and now it's the 2020 indicators show it's 7.5 million. So this is almost the half of migrants who left the Russian labor markets since their economy is also is in recession, and then of course there's a decrease in earnings. That's why they're all leaving the Russian labor markets. And back at home in Tajikistan, we have high inflation, and there's no way to place all those migrants who came back home. There's no way to place them in the labor market back in Tajikistan because there's no workplaces here, and the living standards of people has sufficiently. The living standards of the people who relied on the remittances from migrants have sufficiently been reduced. So for instance, Tajikistan has been battling the poverty very effectively for the last decade, and it had showed very good results. And now that this crisis could again bring the risk of bringing those people back to where they were to very to the poverty. So, and we also have the long-term consequences. What we think in the future, of course, even now there's a budget shortages, but in the future there might be also budget shortages. Reducing the reduced living standards, which also could be considered as a short term. And later, when we see the reduced standards, people would like to desk research that we've found, and in the next all the options. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Sherzod and Mr. Dariush, for that very interesting presentation. So we've had two presentations on migration from Kyrgyzstan and one from Tajikistan. So it really gives you a regional perception of the impact of COVID-19 on migration and remittance issues in Central Asia, and also the impact on the economy, as the presenters mentioned throughout this panel. So now we will move on to the discussion session. So Mr. Muslimbek Buriev is invited to discuss the three panel papers today, and he has a total time of 15 minutes, and I'm sure you will all be very interested to hear his insights and comments on these three very good papers that we have seen today. So over to you, Mr. Muslim Buriev.
Yeah, and also as other panelists said, like they're being at the Oscars awards. Thank you, the Academy. So I also would like to thank the Academy for being. It's a pleasure to contribute to the activities of the OSCE Academy. So I would like to say that I was judging from the drafts that was primarily sent to me before the event started. So I was looking at the drafts. So now also looked at, but I will stick to the comments that I have already produced when I was looking at the draft. So I would like to start from the last panel. From the last presentation presented by Shahrzad and Ryush. So I had a couple of highlights that I would like to present to you. So the first is that you mentioned that among the long-term and short-term consequences of the COVID-19 pandemic is the outflow of migrants. But before you said that the remittances is one of the most important sources for our GDP. So isn't that good that the people will go and then send again? The amount of remittances will then increase or decrease. It's not clear at that stage. Or maybe you could stress that after the pandemic will end, after the restrictive measures will be lifted, so the people will go and never come back to Tajikistan. They will not send the remittances. So it would be very important to mention something like that. To clarify, because for now it looks a bit contradictory. Okay, let's see what you will answer to that. And the second one is that you mentioned that one of the restrictive measures was the license that were of which expiry date was prolonged until December, if I'm not mistaken. I'm talking now the management of Russian government or the local government in Moscow as well. But then, according to the data that you provided, that still the number of migrants has decreased to 40%, right, in Moscow in particular. So even though the licenses, the employment and the residence permits were prolonged, but the migrants still wanted to come back home. So what does it demonstrate? That migrants are not sure, that they're not, they don't believe these measures to be in favor to them. So it will be interesting also to see what to demonstrate in terms of the behavior of the labor migrants from Tajikistan when the restrictive measures were imposed in the beginning of the pandemic. So the third moment I would like to highlight is that you also mentioned that you are going to conduct informative interviews with experts. Also, I would like, I'm personal as a reader, I would like to see what kind of experts in what, in migration or the economy. In that respect, it's quite dubious that experts in migration will tell you something new, something that would differ from the information that you already provided in both in the presentation and the draft. So what do you expect to hear from the experts? What is new that you expect to hear from them that will contribute to your research, to your policy brief in the end? And also, I would like to suggest you to talk more with economists or the state representatives who can talk about how a Tajik government can react, or how it is already reacting against the backdrop of the pandemic, and considering all the consequences that you mentioned already. Maybe you can also ask them about the consequence that you mentioned. You can also ask them, is it true? Can we say so? Is it really going to happen if nothing is done in the nearest future? So the suggestion is to talk more, not with the experts in migration, but with experts on the Tajik economy, with experts on the state management. So as you see, Tajikistan mismanaged the pandemic. So, and now what are exactly they're doing to, for example, bring back the labor migrants back from Russia? How they're going to integrate them, for example, in order to not to deteriorate the situation on the labor market in Tajikistan. So because there's a risk for the unemployment to increase as well. And also there's one small suggestion that's not connected to some particular part of your research, but overall to your approach to stress, always to stress the issue. I mean, always to look at the big picture. So always ask yourself, what does it demonstrate? So the migrants want to go home. What does it demonstrate? Russian government decided to prolong the working permits, the expired working permits of labor migrants. So what does it demonstrate? So they want to keep them. They want to have good relationship with Tajikistan. Tajikistan raised ticket prices for their own citizens who were stuck in Tajikistan. What does it demonstrate? Also, is it connected to the budget deficiency that you have mentioned already? So there are actually lots of things to look at. But still not to overlap. You need to differentiate your sources, to talk with experts who can really provide really practical insights, especially if you are going to produce the policy-related recommendations in the end. So I think that in that respect, it will be quite fruitful for your research. So this is it for Dariush and for Sherzod and Dariush's paper. So I would like to move to Bermet's piece that she presented today. Unfortunately, at this stage, it's very little to grab from your research. For now, it looks more like the layout of facts. So I would really like to suggest you to identify the main focus of your research. So you were telling that that your hypothesis is that labor migrants has very bad life because of the COVID-19 pandemic. There are lots of they're very restricted. They're very handicapped in terms of their economic opportunities for now. But in my perspective, it is quite it's quite intuitive. So I think there are lots of things that you need to add to your research. For example, to look at the returnees, how they're coping with their lives after they left Russia. To look also the same recommendation as for previous presentation that I've discussed is to look at how the institutions reacted to the pandemic in terms of their labor migrants coming back to Kyrgyzstan, how they're going to integrate them, how they're going to cope with that. Do they actually cope with it? If they're not doing it, why? So as I already said, and you also mentioned that you're only starting your research, so I think you have enough time to realize in what direction you should move later within your research. So good luck with it. So now I will move to the first presentation by Nina. I really liked how you connected agricultural reforms to the overall perspective of the labor migration from Kyrgyzstan. I think it is very practical, especially as you proposed some reforms related to pastures and to the development of the cattle industry in Kyrgyzstan. But also there are some comments that you mentioned. There is a gender inequality, and then you started mentioning the how Kyrgyz women facing the assaults from their co-citizens in Kyrgyzstan because of some stigmas that they have and stigmas that they have when they return back to Kyrgyzstan. In that sense, it looks quite disjointed from the rest of the piece. So it's not disregarding COVID, disregarding agriculture, disregarding labor migration. This problem will still exist even after the pandemic. If we're going to tackle this problem, it takes a much more complicated approach to that, because it regards behavior, it regards stigmas, it regards social norms. So I think it's in that respect, it looks a bit way out of what you for now can propose? I mean, in terms of the topic that you have now, that connecting agriculture with the COVID and labor migration. But instead of that, you could just stress a bit how in Kyrgyzstan, in agricultural business, how they're coping. So what are the factors that affect that inequality in that term, in the terms of agricultural business that already exist? I mean, the enterprises led by women already exist, because you mentioned that you proposed Kyrgyz government to finance more, to subsidize more to the women-led enterprises, I mean, in agriculture. So how, what challenges these enterprises are facing right now in order to make it more, how to say, clear that it needs to be solved. So the second moment is, so how can we assure that people will actually be willing to work within the agricultural sphere, right? Because most of labor migrants, I know it's from Tajikistan and Kyrgyzstan as well, they go to Russia and they actually don't work in the agricultural sphere. They work in the constructions or the public service, like waiters, cleaners, babysitters. Also, I know that Kyrgyz women, they work as babysitters as well, and also in the beauty industry. I don't know how to say it correctly. So how to ensure that if people come back to Kyrgyzstan while having the experience in public sphere, in catering, for example, how they're going to shift their let's say career interests, how they're going to shift it to agriculture. So we could just stress more about the maybe reforming the education system, the education in agriculture, how to make it more, for example, available, how to make agriculture more not also economically beneficial, but also more attractive in terms of the prestige. Let's say it like that. So in that respect, you could also see types of employment people seek in in Russia. What types of the labor migrants from Kyrgyzstan seeking in Russia? So maybe some of them they go and work with the farmers, or maybe some they buy land. Maybe some instance that can be related to that. So also, what do we have here? What did I miss in your paper, in the draft that was sent to me, is what the Kyrgyz government is doing with agriculture, what they've been doing before the pandemic started in the whole world. So what the repercussions for the agriculture would be, because the problem with agriculture existed even before, and it's existing now, it exists in the future. So if this problem existed all this time, so did Kyrgyz government do anything with the agriculture? Or what reforms did they propose? Maybe inside the parliament, or maybe the civil society maybe proposed some changes in the legislation, more facilitation for the agriculturalist to make it more favorable for the young people, for example. So you could, or did they do nothing with that? Why did they do nothing with that? And also seeing that some of the questions stressed it already, because it's really financial resources for reforms, and what Kyrgyz government should do in that respect as well. So how they're going to find money for that? How they're going to find specialists for that? To who should they apply with the proposal of these reforms? Where should they seek money? Simply. And I think, yeah, that's it. Overall, quite a good work. I would really like to really look forward to it when it's finished. So I hope that my input was, to say, useful for all of the participants of this panel. So maybe let's see what you have. You're going to answer to my comments as well. So thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Muslim. I think you have greatly enriched the discourse of this conference today. And I would like to thank the participants, the panelists, and of course the keynote speaker for engaging in such a topical issue and enlightening us with your knowledge and your very policy-oriented research. So on behalf of the OSCE Academy, thank you very much for joining us, and we hope to see you soon again. Thank you.